Afternoon, everyone. Good to have you with us. We're going to keep on, let folks come into the conversation, and then we'll get started. Judy and Molly and Dan from CEONet, they're on the line as well. They were kind enough to come on early just to get us settled. Well, welcome. Thanks again for joining us for the CEO Roundtable for our Community Foundation friends. We're now in the sixth virtual gathering of the field, if you will, and want to be able to create as much time for you to all chat and connect. So again, good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I want to invite Molly Kunkel, Center Foundation in Pennsylvania. I just want to introduce you to the group and let you kick us off here.
All right, wonderful. Great. Thanks everybody for being here. Really excited about these. I'm sure a number of you have been at some of the other sessions and they're always really interesting and engaging. And so I'm particularly looking forward to this one and sharing, just sort of having conversations. I have been part of the group that's starting up CEONet. And I know, again, we've talked about that during the other sessions, so we won't talk too much about it, but basically we are really looking forward to getting a network of community foundation CEOs, executive directors, and the kind of the leadership of community foundations together to be able to share and network and do events exactly like this. So we really appreciate the council partnering with us on these, and you'll be hearing from us probably in the fall sometime with sort of more information about formalizing that process for CEONet. But in the meantime, we appreciate everybody joining in on these and sharing all the insights we have to share. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Molly. So again, it is just a delight to see you all, and an interesting topic. You know, last month when we came together, we were talking specifically about what we were seeing in the field around helping nonprofits who were having extraordinary challenges with their finances and the revenue stream, and even talking about some creative strategic approaches to mission alignment. We heard from some folks who were leading some very aggressive programs around mergers and acquisitions type arrangements that bring together back office support, create shared services. And those are very true in these times as well, as people reimagine how they might deliver services. And it got us thinking that organizational health of the nonprofit sector is no different for most of us as community foundations. And many of you are worrying just as much about those budgets and how the projections are going to look going forward. And so that's where we wanted to start this particular conversation. You know, as we think about challenges with staff and volunteer vulnerabilities, outreach capacities, you know, even means in which you're going to try to convene going forward, donors or community leaders. So there's just a lot going on, and certainly we heard in not the CEO Roundtable, but in other discussions, a lot of you are tackling IT right now. You know, there were some technological upgrades that had to happen just to make this virtual reality work, but then in general, trying to stay with the times with modernizing technologies for donor services and so forth. So I think it might be helpful if we just start with a quick poll. So my colleague Daniela, who's with us, she can pop up the polls for us within Zoom here so that we can take a look at. The first question that I wanted us to look at is asking you directly, will your 2021 budget experience revenue shortfalls that are going to create deficits? So
Brett,
the question
I'm so sorry.
yeah.
The polls froze. So give me 1 second.
Sure, nothing like a freezing, you know, in the middle of a show, right? So as we work on the poll, think about that. That's going to be the number. We got a series of questions that we're going to ask you, but the first one is asking about whether your budget has experienced some revenue shortfalls that create deficits. Many of you might be in that process of starting to project what 2021 is going to look like. And Daniela, just let me know. It's no worries if I need to just kind of have a discussion.
I just made you co-host. Would you mind clicking on the polls at the bottom to see if you can launch them?
Well, let's see what I can do. So you should see a poll right now that allows you to quickly log in. Yes, you're experiencing shortfalls, or no, it's not creating any kind of shortfall that's going to create a deficit for you. So we're seeing some live action real quick. We'll give it a few more seconds as we get majority in, 72% already there.
Brad, did that work for you?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Daniela.
Yeah.
the mystery woman behind the scenes. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and you should be able to see the clear results. So the good news is 61% of you are right now feeling confident that this is not going to create a significant revenue shortfall. The bad news is we still got almost 40% of you that are going to have some challenges to make up on the budget. I'm going to move forward to another poll, I believe. What happens next, Daniela, to do that? Do I just close out on it?
You do the drop down at the bottom, at the top,
Okay.
I'm sorry, and then it should
Got it.
say launch poll 2. Yeah.
Got it. All right. Hopefully you all see a new one here in 1 second. So this one here, will you engage in direct fundraising appeals to achieve operational revenue goals? %60 of you are filling this out. Right now it looks like some of you, majority of you are already, half of you at least, are thinking about engaging in some direct fundraising appeals. Give it 1 more second here to finish out. All righty, gonna push it over to you. Can you see those results? We're just darn right down in the middle in terms of what you all are experiencing on your need to fundraise. I'm going to move on to one more, at least one more here, because I think there's some value in just getting a sense of where we are in the room. Will you reduce your spend rate for grant making in 2021? So are you planning or discussing or anticipate reducing the spend rate in which you make your grants in 2021? This is always a difficult conversation. As you know, needs are going up. People are having the challenge of weighting against the long-term longevity of the fund. 86% of you in, so I'm going to go ahead and end this out and show you out here. 90% of you are saying no. You're going to keep that spend rate where it is, and we'll talk more about what that looks like. So that's good to hear. Last question, if I'm smart enough. No. Did I just bring? Yes.
I think you can do it.
You know, it takes a little time, but all right. Last question. Will your 2021 budget require staffing reductions? This is coming at you here. Will your 2021 budget require staffing reductions? %90 of your hands. So I'm going to throw this back at you. So 95% of you are going to be able to maintain your staffing as is. So let's stop there and let's just open this up to the floor. I'm just wanting to hear some initial reactions to your own responses, to what you saw, what you were hearing from your peers. Every one of you said, there was no I'm not sure button. That's a reality there. Judy, you want to, I see you're off mute. And again, people feel free to raise your hand and jump in or just wave at me. But Judy, what's your thinking as you saw some of this?
Well, I'm off mute just because I'm too ignorant to put my mute on. So I'm sorry. I have a cough drop in my mouth. So if I'm talking kind of funny, I'm not chewing tobacco here, even though it's not that unusual in this part of the country. I think I'm with the person who said, you know, I'm not sure, because I've been here through the year 2001 when assets tanked. I've been here through 2008 to 2010. I've been through, this is not the first rodeo. So I think the key thought I would have is that I'm not sure, but we're also being very prudent. While we don't think we're going to have a shortfall, we did get the Paycheck Protection Loan. We are sort of riding that into the fall, keeping a reserve from spring so that we don't have to reduce anything. We always do an operating solicitation once a year anyway, so it's going to be business as usual in that regard. And surely, to the extent we can, this is not the time to reduce our payouts. So I think we were right in line with what the majority was saying on that, but I also think people, as we head into this, need to not fear making prudent business decisions if they have to. I say that coming from a for-profit background.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in here? Just reflections, reactions to what you were seeing as far as how people are feeling relatively confident, if we want to frame it up. There was some confidence in being able to move forward. Susie, you're off mute. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would say the only thing that only adjustment we really made was I had hoped to make some larger salary adjustments going into our current fiscal year, and those weren't as large as adjustments as I wanted them to be. We still had a significant carryover from our fiscal year that ended June 30th going into the current fiscal year. So we're pretty good, but we were just trying to be really careful with what was going to happen with the market. So I guess that's the only thing I really have to add at this point.
Thanks, Susie. Matt, I see you're in the chat there. For those of you who are in the chat, Matt brought up a good question about who took PPE loans to help stabilize the organization. Certainly, we know that was a conversation that many community foundations, and feel free for anyone to jump in on that in this discussion or even in the chat. But that is a critical element of this. And actually, it was a win for the nonprofit sector to be incorporated into those offerings, which is not something that is always right there in front in the capacity for community, or not just community foundations, but the nonprofit sector to engage. And we know there were some big stories out there as those were starting to play out.
Hey, Brad, this is Walker. Just to add a comment, we did take the PPE loan. We did not do the first round. We felt that we spent a lot of resources trying to help smaller nonprofits get access to the PPE loan that first round. But this, as we learned in the second round, we felt we would be foolish not to go after it. It was for us, it was a big values discussion in terms of, was it the right type of thing for us to do? And at the end of the day, our board came down to thinking that it was fiscally responsible for us to be sure we were shoring up our reserves, not knowing what was going to be in store for this fall. So our board has made the decision to use a lot of the PPE loan that we have the adequate reserves to absorb any operating budget losses that we'll likely see. But we've made the decision to go into our reserves to kind of reinvest those reserves that were shored up by PPE back into the community to address some of the racial injustices that are going on with supporting some other nonprofits. We're also adding a VP position of a VP for diversity and inclusion to really help shore up our commitment to make sure we're addressing the things that we can address internally with our organization and help other organizations that are also interested in figuring out what can they do to address some of the racial injustice in the organization and as well as in the community. I'd be curious to get some other reactions to how they're either using the PPE to do similar type of work or engaging the community in discussion around some of the racial injustices that are happening across the country.
Thank you, Walker. I appreciate it. Good to see you again. It's been a while. Anyone want to jump in on that? There was a core question around utilizing PPE as well as the racial injustices. Marcella, you're off mute. I don't know if that means you're wanting to jump in or not, but
I don't know how to raise my hand, so I clapped. I don't know.
I like it. Let's hear. Please,
I'm not clapping for racial injustice. I just want to put that out there. Good morning from the West Coast and good afternoon to everybody in Central and East Coast. I was just going to comment briefly. Like Judy, I come from the for-profit sector and got the organization through 2008, 9, and 10. Everyone's assets are different in this group, and ours, a large portion of our assets are funds that we manage for other nonprofits and endowments. And so I did a calculation based off of a kind of a draconian 25%, loss of assets, and what would we have to do with our operations and our reserves in order to keep everybody employed and all of that. So went through that exercise. I would encourage everybody to do that if you haven't already. But in regards to social injustice, we instead of jumping on that bandwagon, we have worked through our nonprofits in the city that are already working on those issues. There's a few groups, a few nonprofits, and so looking to elevate them, looking to promote what they're doing and make sure that they have a platform and a grant source and things like that. But not taking the lead on that. We prefer actually to just sort of address the broad charitable purposes of the community rather than take issue with that. But that one's hard because that's a very real and serious issue that is plaguing our city and our country. So, but we've had a lot of internal discussions about other ways that we can support, advocating sort of just in the background, more or less.
Thank you. Anyone else? This is two good questions that are floated there.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was interested to hear Walker and his discussions with the board. I took it to our board, not for the first round of PPE, but the PPP loans, but we did have actually a long and a really good conversation with our board about whether or not to do that. And they decided that they didn't want to apply, that they didn't think that second round, if you remember when we were talking about it, a lot of those stories were just hitting the news about the great big companies that got it, and people were sort of that was at top of mind. And even though I don't think it was like if we got it, other nonprofits wouldn't get it, that really wasn't kind of how those were working. At the same time, I think by the time we were having that discussion, the market had come up a fair amount. So we were, 10% down or something, but it just didn't seem as bad as it had earlier. And they just really felt like the nonprofits might feel like, well, we didn't really need it. And even if we turned it around and said, well, this just gives us more to give back. So our board just decided that they just didn't think it was kind of the right message. And it was okay. I mean, we're okay. We have some, we know we have some discretionary funding that can kind of make that up. So, we weren't feeling desperate, but it was very thoughtful discussion, and there were really opinions on both sides. So I think I assume probably a lot of people had those discussions of, if you didn't really need it, was it, but it's always helpful anyway, more to give back to the community. So I thought that was really interesting. I appreciated hearing that, Walker.
There's a really good thread in the chat we'll get to in a second about 10%. And Molly, remembering that you're from Pennsylvania, they've addressed this at legislation level, at the state level. So we'll jump into that. But Dan, I wanted to bring you in. I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I recognize the complexity of the PPP loan issue. We did take it, and actually is very helpful for our operating budget this year. I think part of the rationale for us was we started our own local COVID fund in collaboration with United Way and other funders, and we were charged no fees on that fund. So we saw our operational capacity and our leadership work, tied to some of that compensation that was offered on the federal level, and kind of justifying the services we provide. And I think more broadly, the other thing, I've mentioned this a few other times, that for me, this is a great opportunity to demonstrate the importance of administrative endowment funds. And the fact that if you have an administrative endowment, that helps provide that revenue source to our operating budget, and especially tying it into kind of Walker's comments around social injustice, or, we're framing it as DEI work, and, our leadership work, our community initiatives are really part of what we tie to our administrative endowment, that those are the things that help go beyond just core operating expenses and help us to provide that critical leadership work in the community. So I think not that we're pushing for administrative endowment gifts right now, it's not a great time for endowment building, but I think times like that are challenging in terms of the economy, just give some rationale for us to demonstrate the importance of that to fuel our mission and our services.
I was thinking specifically, so many of you, the chat was talking about the 10% increase, which Peter, that's an interesting, approach. And I appreciate you sharing that, because as we know, in the state of Pennsylvania, they actually just legislation-wise approved for prudent management of endowments to be able to exceed their typical 7% ratio of spending up to 10% through 2022. Not necessarily encouraging or requiring it, but they're certainly creating that space. And that was, I believe, led by the museums and the universities, at least as far as I know. Sam or Mike, maybe one of you can clarify, but that was an important step, I believe, and just the notion of creating more access to more resources. So Peter, if you're on somewhere, I saw you earlier, Peter Dunn from Syracuse, maybe just a little bit of insight to the boardroom discussion or in general, the work around that, would be curious to hear.
Thanks, Brad. Well, we closed our fiscal year in March, so we were having our budget conversations around the time everything was hitting the fan in March. It didn't really affect our planning, but we wanted to put funds aside for the collaboration that we created with other funders in United Way. And we currently have a 4.4% spending rate on our general funds and endowments and using a 20-quarter trail. And I pitched the board on increasing that by 10%, which gave us an additional 300 grand to play with for COVID response. And I'm going to be asking the board in September to do that again, which will effectively raise our payout on those general funds from 4.4 to 5.2%. So that'll be a 20% increase. So that's the way that we went about it. We did take the PPP, which effectively subsidizes part of this investment. But in any case, the board has felt good about it because it provided some resources that didn't mean that we were invading our general grants and initiatives budget, that we could do this other leadership work over and on top of everything else we were doing.
Great perspective. And I know Bob Morris, you referenced the idea of more than just one distribution, which seems to be following what Peter's discussion. Anyone else on just the higher payouts? Anyone else that's working through that significantly higher payouts than what the spending rate normally would produce?
I saw Georgina's hand was up.
Oh, thanks.
A minute or two ago. I don't know if she's still there.
Jump on.
Yeah, it was, but it was about the PPE loan, and you've already moved on, so don't worry about it.
Well, if you have something was that a discussion for you all?
We have to run a really large gala every year just to keep the lights on. So we were feeling like that could certainly come in much lower, and then we would be looking at staff layoffs in 2021. So we did do it, but much like what Dan did, we made sure that then the staff were actually working more than full time, probably the first 4 months there. Because we had done it ourselves, we were able to get a lot of nonprofits, especially ones with volunteer CPAs or bookkeepers who were helping small business owners. We were able to help them put in their PPE loans. We were able to ensure that they would have the documentation to get them forgiven. We were able to launch a joint COVID relief fund with United Way, and even write grants and reach out to corporations and large donors to fund that. So we were able to leverage a lot more money for our community, and our loan was, we have a very small operating budget, so the loan was relatively small, just $20,000. But just what it means is it's taken the pressure off for that virtual gala that we'll be holding later in the year. And then we're leveraging everything that we're learning about how to hold a gala virtually to help other nonprofits do that as well. I would say it's our 25th anniversary year, so we had tons of events planned, tons of special activities, and one of our activities was challenge grant making for endowed funds. For some of our nonprofits here are quite small, and so they've never had the opportunity to have an agency endowment. And we were February 1st was the deadline for submissions, so we had just actually chosen the group of people when the governor's order came down to shut down. And we reached out to them and said, do you still want this challenge, or do you feel like you couldn't come up with your half? They all not only wanted the challenge, but many of them have already completed the challenge. And we've gotten more calls for people to start endowments. So it's interesting to me, people are having a different conversation with donors, especially donors that seem to be in a certain age level in our area. I'm not sure that goes across the board, but 70.5 donors here have not seen a huge impact in terms of their income. or in terms of their ability to give. And they're really open to a conversation about ensuring a diversity of income streams, making sure if a bad thing happens again, that their favorite charity has got some kind of a buffer. So we've been having positive conversations about endowments, and just received checks in the mail all the time to these new little acorn endowed funds. So
it's impressive to be talking about endowments, and certainly that's something we can bring up for anyone that wants to comment about what is the activity. There was certainly one of the questions on my mind was the tensions of donor advised funds, perhaps bringing lots of money in and lots of money needing to go out, and just handling that administrative challenges that comes with. And so it's good to hear that you're still operating within an endowment environment. I saw Christy was joining us from Iowa. That, really reminded me when Walker was talking about shifting priorities and racial injustices and working on that work. It also made me think about just you in light of this week having very significant disasters of your own in Iowa around the weather. I know it's been more eastern Iowa, our friends in Cedar Rapids and Quad Cities and so forth. But I'm curious to you, first of all, how is Iowa faring as far as you can tell, and maybe just give us an update of what these types of disasters bring to mind to you as you plan for everything to core focus on the pandemic and the long-term, economic challenges that this is going to present, and then add on a whole nother layering of disaster.
Well, thanks for asking. That's actually why I was able to join unexpectedly today. We were doing a racial equity conversation through the Iowa Council of Foundations, and we had to cancel because so many people still don't have power over a week after the storm came through. So pretty incredible. I was in Colorado on vacation and had a staff meeting that morning till about 10 a.m. By 10:30, I was getting photographs of trees down, and nobody even knew a storm was really headed the way of Des Moines and the rest of the state. So especially devastating in places like Marshalltown and Cedar Rapids that are just recovering from major tornado and years ago major flood damage. But I think what I've learned is just the importance of getting people around the table to be prepared. Thankfully, we had been working with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy for a year, and really had put a plan and vision in place for what response would look like in our community if we were faced with disaster. And who knew that we would then have a global pandemic to respond to, but we were ready because we already had the players at the table, we already had the fund ready to deploy, already had a marketing plan and things like that were in place. And then thankfully we have affiliates, so we've got 39 counties and communities affiliated with the Community Foundation. We can use that same structure, that same model, that same template to help them establish disaster recovery funds very quickly on behalf of their communities. So we had many of our affiliates do that as well. And we're setting those up with a structure that it's not just about COVID, it's about disaster recovery in general. So many of those have shifted already to deal with the damage of the last week in addition to COVID. So that's been nice to have that flexibility. Is that what you were looking for, Brad?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's just nice to hear. Molly, I'll just pause here and see what's on your mind, what you're thinking.
I think this is an interesting, just hearing Christy, for this, I think probably a lot of people are wondering about that as we're entering in hurricane season. Those of us that are in areas that might get hurricanes or wildfires, kind of how people are preparing to deal with several disasters at once. I think, so it's good. And we've actually had, our United Way has a fund that was set up by a donor a while ago specifically to deal with natural disasters. And they've actually, put that in place and are using that again as it's sort of this was not expected what the kind of natural disaster they were expecting to use it for. But we all agreed, and they agreed certainly that the pandemic meets all the, it's certainly a community disaster. So I think it's interesting to hear what people are doing around that. Kind of one of the things I know, Brad, you mentioned before, just to shift topics a little bit, or go to the next, is about donor advised funds. Are people seeing, certainly, you know, you read stories about some of the larger foundations are recommending that people give out more money. I think there have been some, certainly there are always stories about encouraging people to give out more money from their donor advised funds. We haven't personally seen that in our foundation, that donor advisors have been giving a little bit more, and they were certainly quick to, it was a little easier to get them to make commitments, but we haven't had people come in and rush and say, you know, there's an urgent need, it's all coming out now. I will also say we are not heavily, our donor advised funds do not make up a big part of our endowments. Most of our endowments are not donor advised. They're regular designated endowments. But just wondering what experience people have had with donor advised funds and donor advisors, and how that is playing out for people.
Brad?
Yeah, Judy.
Judy here. What we're finding is our donor advisors, and this frankly is the same thing I saw way back in 2008 to 2010, our donor advisors are waiting to be asked. People are wanting to help. People like all of us are just feeling very isolated, and you know, this Zoomy world and virtual world is causing people to feel very isolated. And I found that our donor advisors are looking for ways to help. We have had a couple of our donor advised funds that formed the backbone for our first part of our COVID response. When we went out to the community, I asked one of the donor advisors to put up a match, basically to ratchet up some of the grant making for our funds, with the understanding that that match money went out the door also. And it exponentially helped. And in fact, we had 2 local companies that didn't previously have donor advised funds decide to step up and offer challenge matches for their employees. You know, so we really found that our donors were looking for a way to be directed to help, and very willing to help. I had one donor that said to me, well, when you run out of that money, let me know. There's more where that came from, basically.
Those are always nice statements. Christy, I see you were commenting that you're up over 40% year to date over last year. If anyone else is seeing similar activities, any strain on the system? Is it all good? Is it all positive?
This is Shelley from Wichita, Kansas, and we've seen an increase in our donor advised fund giving as well. And we did a couple of calls like this early on just to let our donors know we were up and operating, and that our markets, that we hadn't tanked as bad as the rest of the market, and found that to be a great entree. And we're getting more interaction from donors calling us and asking us where the greatest need is. And we're seeing some, you know, you never know exactly what the impact of our conversations are, but we have seen the increase. And I think more importantly for us, we've seen the increase in their reaching out to us. And then of course we're corresponding and engaging in what we see as the greatest need.
Don't want to cut anyone else off.
I have just a kind of a follow-up that I'd like to on that one, with donor advisors asking. One of the things that we've found, and I'm just wondering if anyone else is experiencing this, donors have asked us, and they'll say, you know, well, is there more need? But actually right now, a lot of the real need, at least in this community, we think hasn't really hit yet. There are moratoriums on evictions. People were getting the extra money from their unemployment checks. And so one of the things that I think some of the nonprofits here are a little concerned about is they're saying, we're not actually getting a lot of calls from people right now, but we think we will. We worry the extra money is going to go away. The evictions moratoriums are going to be gone. And yet donors may start to feel like the crisis has moved on. And I just wondered, is anybody else sort of experiencing that, and that their donors are anticipating that there's a lot of urgent need and it just actually isn't there? Sandy, it looks like you're shaking your head.
Yes, we've experienced the same thing where the nonprofits are not seeing the level of need that they anticipated. And our donors are confused and so what that's leading to is greater number of donations, because they trust that we are on the ground in regular communication, and so they feel more comfortable that if they give to us, that it will be that we'll be responding in the need when it occurs. Our response teams are absolutely believe that the worst is yet to come, so they've been very reluctant to be too free with the grants in the COVID response because of the same thing. And honestly, I'm so glad to hear somebody else say that the needs have not been huge, because it's shocking, just because folks look at the news and they see lines, food lines, and all sorts of things, and a lot of appeal for money, but we're not seeing it from the pantries that we're supporting and serving. So it's starting to tick up a little bit, but not anywhere close to what we thought. And so donors are trusting us to be prudent with those donations.
Thanks, Sandy. Nancy, I know you had your hand raised. Was there anything else, Sandy? I know you had your hand raised earlier. Was that kind of what you were hoping to jump in? Okay, great. Nancy Brown.
Well, one, I wanted to agree with the sentiment of where this conversation just went, where there hasn't been a lot of need surfacing. I have a whole side conversation on that, but what I wanted to mention to or respond to was the question about the fund advisors not being asked. And I teach Masters in Philanthropy and Development class. I just finished it, Strategic Giving. And the reality is that there are a lot of professional fundraisers out there that just don't understand how donor advised funds work, and that the relationships that they have are with the fund advisors, although we have the final say in it. And so really trying to teach and educate them on the fact that the relationship stays with the fund advisor. It doesn't come to us. And somehow this is a barrier for fundraisers. And so it causes agitation in that community in saying that we are hoarding dollars, that we're squatting on dollars that really can go out and have immediate impact in our communities. And just really trying to help them understand that we in community foundations want to see those dollars go back into our community. The flip is that when you look at the commercial fund holders like the Fidelities, the Vanguards, and Schwabs, they're not developing the relationships with the fund advisors and putting opportunities in front of the fund advisors. And I believe that there is a lot of activity in the fundraising community about forcing legislation that's going to dictate to us as fund sponsors what those payouts must look like in the future. So just something that I wanted to share in terms of our fund advisors not being asked.
Thanks, Nancy. I believe Mike might have been trying to come in, Mike Kane, but while I confirm that, Sally Crosser, you have your hand raised. I wanted to bring you in.
Oh, Nancy, you just hit a sore spot with me, and I just finished teaching a major gifts course at BayPath, graduate course at BayPath University, and I have like a whole section on treating your donor advised fund advisors well. But I think, the comments, I was really interested to hear the comments about not seeing the need, because of course I'm in New York. We are just north of the COVID's, initial epicenter crisis in New York City. And I have exactly the opposite fare. We saw food pantries seeing 300 and 400, 500% growth in demand overnight. What I worry about now is that as New York has sort of gotten its act sort of together, largely compared to many other states, and things are, we are moving into reopening phases, that people will feel the urgency is less, when in fact this slow rolling thing, the ending of the unemployment, the ending of the eviction bans, it's going to be this next huge wave of problems that people would maybe not be as sensitive to as they were 2 months ago, when you literally saw lines of cars for blocks and blocks and blocks. So it's I can tell you it's coming. I hope it's not to your community, but it's and the donor advised fund donor relations issue is just a whole nother thing we could do a whole session on, but I don't know that that's helpful.
Thank you, Sally. Mike?
Yeah, I kind of want to sort of, I'm very appreciative of this conversation and what everybody's experiencing, because it's helpful to hear the overlap. We were really busy with our COVID fund in, sort of March, April, May. We're still holding some funds back because some of the things that we were supporting, food, EMS, and volunteer fire companies and so forth, began to get some support from state or federal CARES money. And I think that is going to continue and run out, at some point. And so we're holding back for the winter because we think that what's going to happen, either with increased with evictions, with rent subsidies going away, and so on and so forth, there's going to be a pretty significant need, and especially if it's a bad winter, because our community regularly, outspends the LIHEAP money and so on and so forth. And so we typically hold money in our fall round for home heating needs. And we're kind of anticipating that's going to be worse this year, and feel that's going to be a legitimate use of our remaining COVID money.
Thanks, Mike. And while I appreciate, the concept of this being around the most essential services and the meeting direct needs, I'm also very much aware of the fact that we have an entire additional nonprofit sector that relies on earned revenue and relies on other streams of income that is just not going to be existent to their capacity to really keep people on staff and keep the programs in light. And then I couple it with Walker's comments earlier in thinking about the racial injustices that came to light that helped us really see the lack of inclusion in who is getting funding and how easy it is for them, to Nancy's point, get connected with the funders and be in those right circles and networks of influence. So I'm curious across the board what people are thinking even beyond essential needs, and especially as we go into the winter months and the second wave that will tie in influenza. But I want to get to Nancy. I see you have your hand up.
Talking about the those that aren't the essential needs, we changed our competitive grant program in our second cycle to straight up operating funds. And what we were looking at is replacing revenue that was lost either due to inability to have people use your services or enter your facilities, or you lost revenue because you were no longer able to hold your fundraising events. And one of the things that we spent some time thinking about, or the board spent time thinking about, was what do we want to look like post-pandemic? Do we want to lose our arts organizations because they're not seen as essential? Do we want to lose our museums because they're not essential? And so we had different criteria, but some of our grants did go out to what would be probably considered non-essential, but deliver services, particularly in this environment where they're able to do some things virtually and meet some social needs of our community, not just its social emotional needs, not just the food and shelter.
Thanks, Nancy. And I can tell you that in those early months, going all the way into early summer, there was incredible amounts of traffic around how to help the small community, or the small business community, and what role community foundations with philanthropic capacity could support small businesses, some of the lifeline to local job creation and job connection. And so that was a critical area too that I suspect is only going to continue to stretch into 2021 as we continue to have significant challenges in the small business environment. And if I can do a plug, a shameless plug, it reminds me of what we're about to talk about this Thursday afternoon at 2:00 Eastern, where CF United, which was supposed to have its conference in Detroit, it's retooling some of those conversations. And on Thursday, you're going to hear from 4 executives in Michigan who happen to all be younger, incredibly diverse leaders who come from diverse backgrounds and are diverse in themselves in the sense that they're not all white, as we look around our own screen here. And so it's great to hear those perspectives coming to the surface, and they're friends outside of work. And so you're about to see a preview of what their conversations look like when they get going on Thursday. And they're tackling heavy stuff. And and as Isaiah Oliver from Flint, Michigan said, the gloves are going to come off, and we're just going to hit it head on. And so I think if you can join us on Thursday, you'll have a fantastic showcase of talent that's really grappling with some of the real issues within our sector, within our country. And that will continue on next Thursday on the 27th, where we're bringing in Kauffman Foundation, who is really leveling the conversation around entrepreneurship, small business, and how that ties to community vitalization, with, yet again, 4 amazing community foundation leaders from across the country who are going to give you some perspective. So anyways, that was my shameless plug. If you didn't get registered, cfunitedconference.org. But Judy, you had a question. You want to pop in, please?
It was just a curiosity question for those on the call. I'm just curious how other folks are interfacing with their local United Ways. We've actually had a role reversal. Our United Way is really holding on to its relief funds, and part of it is they're thinking that their fall workplace campaign is not going to be as robust. And I think to some degree they're worried a little bit about their own survival because, you know, they live year to year and don't have, in essence, a perpetual source of fees to draw from. So I'm just curious, we've been sort of hit with a role reversal. We've been pushing 100% of our funds we've raised for COVID relief out the door with no fees while they're, as I said, holding on to them.
Thank you, Judy. Mike, I see Mike Kane, you're off mute. Were you wanting to comment about United Way, or you just off mute just in case?
I was just off mute on the art stuff, but
oh, okay.
I appreciate what Judy's saying. Our United Way is holding on to its funds too for the same reasons, I think.
Anyone else want to jump in on United Ways? I mean, there was unprecedented cooperation between our institutions at the start of this this COVID. So I'm curious, what are you learning? What are the challenges that are now starting to present themselves? Anyone?
We certainly are in the same place as Judy. As I said, they do have this fund that was given to them, and I was really excited to hear when they decided to qualify COVID as a natural disaster. The fund was opened as $1 million, is now at about $1.5 million because we haven't had any natural disasters for the last decade when the fund was open. So it's done quite well. And they decided to do this granting that's so narrow and so small. And every month they tout it. At this point, they've given away $45,000 and they're really pleased with themselves. And it just blows my mind. And I keep trying, we tried to say, why don't you partner with us? We put up, $500,000 of kind of money, from our discretionary pool and other things. And I'm having trouble getting that, kind of on the same page of right now is the time to give those funds away. That being said, I think it is very likely they will be in trouble. Their fall fundraising, we don't live as much year to year from what we raise directly as they do. So I don't mean to minimize their struggles, but I'm really interested in people that have either found good ways to partner or good, kind of ways to cooperate, to do what we can for the community, with other United Ways.
I'm going to bring in Georgina and then Christy. Georgina?
So we did, in the beginning, set up that joint relief fund, and I think that made our community feel really, really good that they could give to one fund and knowing it was a joint grant-making effort. But the first phase was definitely towards what I would consider basic needs and kind of the group of people that the United Way might have funded already. And now the second wave of COVID relief that we're doing is a little more focused at the Community Foundation's mission, which is, broad spectrum vibrancy in our community. And we don't want to see children's museums go away. We don't want to see after school programs go away, mental health programs. So while feeding everybody and sheltering everybody and looking forward to a challenging winter, those are all really important. We also can't just have our overall quality of life decline. And we've had a really good response from donors continuing to give to that fund. So I think they do like to see a balance. But we always put right at the top of our page to go directly to the nonprofit that you care about first and find out their needs before giving to the fund. But if you don't feel like you would know, then this is the place to donate. But then we did see the United Way kind of say, we think we have a couple tens of thousands of more money to give to the fund, and then they chose to keep that money for themselves. And I think for a similar reason, that they're concerned about their own grant making and concerned about their own operations coverage, considering their workplace campaigns.
Thank you, Georgina. Susie, I'm going to bring you in, but I wanted to bring Christy in real quick. You had came off mute, so.
We've just had a historically very strong relationship with our United Way. We have a standing, at least monthly meeting, the CEO and myself, and then their community impact officer and ours as well. We launched the Disaster Recovery Fund together at the podium at a press conference, and the United Way and Community Foundation, and work together to make the distributions or investments out of that, along with a couple of other funders. So it's worked well for us to have that strong relationship. The head of the United Way sits on our grant making committee at the Community Foundation, because we involve others, outside of the board on that. I will say though, their model is stressed and will continue to be, especially now as you see more and more people working from home and probably will continue to work from home. That workplace campaign is going to have to look very different. And in our community, we have a stellar United Way in terms of fundraising compared to others across the country. But I will say it's competitive in nature. They have lots of fun events and things like that. It's going to look really different, and it's very stressed this year. So I think we're going to continue to see the struggles that y'all are verbalizing in the chat room with United Ways across the country.
Thanks, Christy. Susie, you were referencing a small business, sort of, I think, a partnership. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm sorry to back us up to small business. But I thought that we had such a unique partnership that developed, I think, during this time. We started having, and I didn't start them, but we started having a bi-weekly food insecurity phone call with different agencies and some foundations. And our school system, our public school system, was involved in the calls. And a partnership developed between our school system that had federal funding to continue to provide free food to every child in our county. And so because of that, they had $2.74 per meal that they could expend. And on the other side, we had our local small restaurants, our local restaurants that everybody loves, who were just absolutely struggling during the complete shutdown. And what they did was, we had a local foods organization that put together, they had some funding that they used to supplement that $2.74 or whatever it was, so that these small restaurants, these local restaurants, could make a decent meal for a dinner once a week for kids in the county. And it really helped our local restaurants. This is something that's still going on, but it happened over at least a 3-month period during the pandemic. And, much better quality food than that you could get for $2.74 and some, crappy government cheese and white bread sandwich. It was a really nutritional, a much better product than they could have gotten from what they were getting with the $2.
You're starting to make me question all my eating habits right now. But when you were talking about United Way, it started making me think about some of the calls I've been getting lately. People have been looking into utilizing technology to bring together more back offices of community foundations in certain regions of the country. I'm just curious, open-ended question here for this group. Is anyone having any conversations about this, about looking for different approaches to how you manage the books, how you collaborate with other community foundations, other institutions like United Ways, where there's some synergies? Anything? Dan, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, we have a complex relationship with our local United Way. And as I mentioned in the chat, I find kind of anecdotally, it always seems like rural relationships are maybe a little harder to, maybe a little more strained or more challenges with United Ways to be solvent in a rural context. So it's great to see more urban context collaboration that works. We have an interesting scenario. We manage a $2 million designated fund to support our local United Way. And they use those dollars primarily for operating expenses, which is a sore subject because the donor who set it up, that family intended those dollars to be used for their distributions. So it's kind of that philosophical issue around how much of their operating support they can capture and then allow for more direct gifts to go directly to the community. But our United Ways really struggled to raise those dollars, and that agree with Christy around the model, really struggling here locally. So we have a nonprofit capacity building program. So we've got some of those functions that we operate ourselves in our community foundation, and we serve some of the traditional United Way model locally. So there have been some suggestions around collaborate or around consolidation there, but we're very careful about that because we manage a fund. We just want them to kind of make their own decisions about whether they're going to dissolve or not, or what. So far we've been able to, I think, complement each other around most of our services, but they're definitely at risk of collapse. We just don't want to take any position to be seen as encouraging that or even trying to do their work for them.
Yeah.
So
thanks, Dan. Daniela is putting the upcoming events in the chat feature, which tells me that I'm running out of time, despite the fact that I really enjoy hanging out with you all because my coworker, the dog, just sleeps all the time. So this is much more enlightening to be with all of you. I believe Daniela is going to put up on the screen any upcoming events just so that you've got awareness. Any last comments, thoughts? Anyone want to get the last word in? Come off mute and just start talking. Anyone? If not, I'm so good at it.
For a second there, Brad, I thought you were talking about your colleague that sleeps all the time. I thought you were going to talk about me.
No, he's sound asleep. He's not moving. But you all can see we've got a great list of things going on. I want to thank all of you. I welcome your continued input, as does CEONet. If you have things that you want to discuss, if you have things, and we also, I'm very much open to your feedback on what formats are working. When we stay in big group compared to going into smaller groups where it's just 10 or 12 of us at a time, having folks come in and really go deep with their programs or their thoughts on issues versus these very much ability to popcorn from person to person. So we welcome how we can be supportive of you all, and if there are specific topics, I want to hear it from you. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of you because there's many of you that I know are never short with good ideas and good words, and so if I missed you, I apologize, but thank you. With that, I encourage you to join us at the CF United Conference pop-up conversations, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Don't be a stranger. Give me a call or give me an email if I can be helpful. Thank you, CEONet. Thank you, as always, for giving me good guidance and bringing this together. And all of you, please take care and be safe.
Thanks so much, Brad. Bye,
everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
to see everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.